As you make your way to the 14th chapter of Jeremiah, let me remind you, last week in the 13th chapter, we really had a denouncement of Judah's pride, and it was probably given under the reign of King Jehoiachin, also known as Jeconiah or Coniah. And he represents, in a way, kind of the consummation of Judah's pride against the Lord. And the Lord allows him, after a short 3 months of his reign, for he and the queen mother, his mother, referenced in Jeremiah chapter 13, verse 18, to be carried off into captivity into Babylon. And so God denounces the pride of Judah, and the king is carried off. And in chapter 14, what we have is probably, and most likely, the chapters that we start with this morning, chapter 14, all the way through chapter 20, those chapters correlating with the very next king. And I've told you before, often Jeremiah does not share his prophecies in chronological order, but these are very close. So last week Jehoiachin, this week Jehoiakim. And he reigns for 11 years. He has a very rough reign. At the beginning of his tenure, he is roughed up by Pharaoh Necho. His name is changed from Eliakim to Jehoiakim. He is eventually, he too, carried off into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar. And during his reign, the 11 years that he reigns, there is a great drought and famine. And so that's the context, the historical setting for chapter 14. Now, in verse 1, with that as the backdrop, chapter 14 of Jeremiah reads, "The word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah concerning the droughts. Judah mourns, and her gates languish. They mourn for the land, and the cry of Jerusalem has gone up. Their nobles have sent their lads for water. They went to the cisterns and found no water. And they returned with their vessels empty. And they were ashamed, and they were confounded. And they covered their heads. And because the ground is parched, for there was no rain in the land, the plowmen were ashamed. And they covered their heads. Yes, the deer also gave birth in the field, but left because there was no grass. And the wild donkeys, they stood on the desolate heights. And they sniffed at the wind like jackals, sniffing for water, as it were. And their eyes failed because there was no grass." And so we have the drought. Now, for you minor prophet aficionados, the little minor prophet Habakkuk, he no doubt references this particular drought in his little prophecy. He was a contemporary of Jeremiah at this time. He prophesied under the reign of King Jehoiakim, and he writes this in verse 17 of chapter 3 of Habakkuk. "Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields they yield no fruit, though the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls," then he resolves himself, if this is the situation, to rejoice in the Lord. "I'm going to rejoice in the Lord," he says, "and I will joy at the God of my salvation." Now, if you remember with me back to chapter 2, one of the first indictments against the people of Judah by the prophet Jeremiah at the behest of the Lord was to tell them that my people, in verse 13, have committed two evils. And the first evil is they've forsaken me, the Lord says, the fountain of living water. And then they've hewn for themselves cisterns that hold no water. So what God's communicating to these people is, here I am willing to give you all the water you need. And yet you've set out, as they would in a dry and thirsty land often where there wasn't much water, and you've hacked out of the rock these cisterns to hold water. Yet, like would happen in those days, you might spend months working on a cistern only to find when it rained that it had a little crack and it would leak. And so all of your hard work and sweat equity would be for nothing. And Lord, so this is what you've done spiritually. Here I am. I'll give you anything you need, but you've You've done it all on your own, and it's all been for nothing.